join me for our call to worship. We come together today in recognition of God's boundless love and acceptance. We will work together for that love to be felt by all that is living. We come together today with compassion. We will work to stay in relationship by love, loyalty, and covenant. We come together today in a posture of humility. We will work to walk with God, loving ourselves and others.
Today, we light the peace candle for hope. It seems the past few years have left us with little room for hope. Children being shot and killed, a broken law enforcement system, inner rage being expressed in forms of random violence in our city, and recovery from a pandemic that seems to have no end. Our city has much to heal from. Although this may sound dire, I was touched and inspired by Amanda Gorman's reading of her poem at the presidential inauguration. In her poem, she begins by describing the darkness we face, but also speaks strongly of hope. Please listen to these excerpts from her lovely poem. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast, and we've learned that quiet isn't always peace. And the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. And yet the dawn is ours. Before we knew it, somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country in a time where a skinny black girl, descended from slaves and raised by a single mother, can dream of becoming president only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge a union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to no one and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew. That even as we hurt, we hoped. That even as we tired, we tried. That we'll forever be tied together victorious, not because we will never again show defeat, no defeat, but because we will never again sow division. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we are brave enough to see it, if only we are brave enough to be it. Let us all have the hope and the bravery to be a flame, to always see and be the light.
Thank you, Sherry. And we respond to this prayer of being light by saying together, each in our own way and our own voice, the prayer that Jesus taught us. Tender, loving God, who is in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Good morning and good day to you all, to those in the room, to those who are watching live at home, and to those who will watch this at another time. We welcome you all. Wherever you are, wherever you've been, wherever you are going in your life, you are welcome here with the rest of us, with seekers and explorers, those who question and wonder. And we hope that you find the love of God and community in this service. My name is Seth Patterson, and I am your minister for spiritual formation and theater, and it is my honor to welcome you all. A few announcements as we do before we continue in worship. Our Sunday forum this morning at 10 o'clock was called Toward an Equitable, Renewable Energy Future, and this was with two people from Native Sun Community Power, which is a new native-led nonprofit around renewable energy. You can find the recording of this forum on our website. And next week, please join us at 10 o'clock on Zoom webinar for Zamia Theater. They are a resident in our building, and it is a theater community made up of people who have and are currently experiencing homelessness. Please come and hear their stories. They need to be heard. Today at 5 o'clock, Sunday, October 10th, we have under our tent our Sundays at 5. This is the second week. It began last week, and today is a contemplative service. So please come and join and sit with other people and be led in a contemplative service outdoors under our tent. All are welcome. Beginning this Thursday is the book study offered by our Racial Justice Initiative on the book When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir, led by Ann Manning and Peter Eichten. You can still register for this. There is still openings. It is this Thursday, October 14th, from 6:30 till 8, and then the following, the 21st, the same time. This Thursday also we have our third in our series of conversations on the Minneapolis ballot measures, and this one is on what is called question number 1. Moderated by Tom Weber, we will have two people in conversation about this, and this is over a Zoom webinar. You can also watch the recordings of the previous two Thursdays' events on questions number 2 and 3. Please, if you live in Minneapolis, this is a great way to educate yourself on these important questions. When the pandemic began, your clergy started a weekly offering called Open Door Conversations with the Clergy. And we met over Zoom once a week, and anybody could join us. And we paused that a little while ago, and we're going to begin it again, but this time in person in Guild Hall. And all are welcome. There's no registration required. We just ask that you come with an open heart, open mind, and some questions. And we acknowledge and are very aware that many people might be coming in with anxiety or distresses or grief and loss that the last several years have brought us. And your whole self is welcome. Please come to the Open Door Conversations with the Clergy this on October 27th at 10:30 a.m., Thursday, October 28th at 1 p.m., or Monday, November 1st at 6 p.m., all in Guild Hall. And you can find more details of this and everything else on our website. And finally, next Sunday, after this service is done, if anybody would like to sit under the tent in community and watch the Vikings play the Carolina Panthers, we will be having a Vikings watch party under the tent. Yeah. I hope to see you all there, and you can come in. You don't have to be right on time. Show up when you're able to get here. Please pick up some food from the local restaurants around or what you pass as you get here. There will also be snacks and hot cider for everybody. And if you have children or grandchildren that are coming with you and they decide that the game is not for them, there will be activities to occupy them and entertain them as well. We can't wait to see you all there. Let us now continue and worship together with our anthem.
Grace and peace to you. We continue in our Command to Preach series, in which members of the congregation submit texts that they would like the preachers to consider. And I am so grateful to Ruth Waterbury for submitting Psalm 46 and 10, which simply says, "Be still and know that I am God." I was fortunate enough to have lunch with Ruth and David Waterbury this past week, and our conversation was a great gift. However, as hard as I tried to pin Ruth down about what she wanted me to say, she would not share it. In fact, we talked about several different texts, and Ruth left me with a bit of wisdom that both inspired and challenged me as I sat with Psalm 46. She said, as we went through a range of topics in text, these texts contain truth if we're willing to listen. Thank you, Ruth. I invite you now to attend to that wisdom as we hear the words of Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of the city. It shall not be moved. God will help it when the morning dawns. The nations are in an uproar. The kingdoms totter. God utters God's voice. The earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Come, behold the works of the Lord. See what desolations God has brought on the earth. But the Lord makes wars cease to the end of the earth, breaks the bow, shatters the spear, burns the shields with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I am exalted among the nations. I am exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Will you pray with me? Merciful, loving God, speak. Your servants are listening. Say a word that we might hear. Use this weak vessel, these lips of clay, to speak life as only you know. Amen. Some of you may conceivably remember that I did my seminary immersion experience in Guatemala. For nearly 3 weeks, we drove the countryside of Guatemala, visiting the survivors and descendants of the martyred of Guatemala's 36-year civil war. Every place we visited still bore the marks of warfare, including bombed and burned out buildings, bullet holes visible on standing structures, and the broken and scarred bodies of survivors. In our travels, we made our way through the rural highlands to the small, beautiful village Santiago Atitlan, with its beautiful volcanic hills and serene lakes. I remember thinking, boy, if I could locate a resort here. It was so quaint and picturesque that one would be hard-pressed to find any sign of it being touched by war. But alas, indeed it was. We saw those same marks on the little Catholic church we visited in the village, St. James of the Apostle, which bore both the signs of war and a shrine to the memory of their beloved Father Stanley Rother, who was affectionately known as the shepherd who didn't run. Father Stanley had been sent to the little parish in 1968 from the Oklahoma diocese, and he set about serving and falling in love with the largely indigenous and peasant population. And they became a beloved community. And together they did so much good, including building schools, a medical clinic, and creating a farm co-op, all still there for us to see. By the time the Civil War had made it to that little village in the late 1970s, Father Stanley became a thorn in the side of the ruling regime. You see, he did not evince any fear of them. Many of the members of the parish he had confirmed were soon disappeared or murdered. And instead of cowering in fear or running away, Father Stanley fed and sheltered the widows and children of the murdered and the disappeared. After several and consistent violent government attacks on very poor people, Father Stanley could be seen walking the rural roads looking for dead bodies to give the victims proper burials. Eventually, Father Stanley's name was being circulated on a kill list, and everyone began to pressure him to hide or leave. The bishops back in the U.S. urged him to come home. But Father Stanley replied in a letter that we can even read today to the bishops in Oklahoma, quote, "The reality is that we are in danger. Given the situation, I am not ready to leave here just yet. If it is my destiny that I should give my life here, then so be it. I don't want to desert my people. There is still a lot of good that can be done under the circumstances. The shepherd cannot run at the first sight of danger." 7 months after Father Stanley wrote that letter, in June of 1981, 3 men broke into the church and overtook Father Stanley. Father Stanley never screamed, but the sisters who were living in the convent on the property said they just believe he engaged with his attackers to distract them from moving over to the convent to harm the sisters. Father Stanley was shot and killed. And as we walked that little church and the places where Father Stanley slept and prayed and preached and served, I kept wondering what made him stand strong when the conventional response was to run. How could he remain so calm in an environment of violence and death? Oh, I'm wondering, and some people must have wondered, why didn't he arm himself to protect the church and the convent? I know he must have been afraid, but he evinced no anxiety. There appeared to be in him a confidence in God's presence that revealed one possessed with the discipline to be still and know that I am God. Just hearing that again, be still and know that I am God, just brings to mind the images of Father Stanley and the shrine to him in the St. James the Apostle Church, because they reveal how powerful a concept of refuge is. Could it be that Father Stanley found a refuge invisible to our own eyes. Psalm 46 contains two familiar and oft-quoted verses that we sing in our hymns and liturgies, and we say in our religious rhetoric. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble, and be still and know that I am God. I would argue that our religious imaginations, especially in our political rhetoric, place outsized focus on the strength of God at the expense of God as presence and refuge. Oh, I'm not quibbling with the descriptions of God as strong and able to help. However, it's just that the martial language that we tend to hold on to seems so vivid. So vivid in a hymn like, "A mighty fortress is our God." Those images, those words, those martial images appear to roll more easily off our tongues than an invitation to people in trouble to be still and let God be God. Martin Luther penned that hymn, and although he indulged those martial images in the lyrics, the place where Luther lived in hiding from trouble, the Wartburg Castle, was indeed a refuge from danger. It's nestled high on a hill, surrounded by a thick blanket of forest. It is a place of refuge and protection. But the people Israel did not have a physical refuge like that in which to hide, but they knew God as refuge and protection. So they sang Psalm 46. Yes, we're reading lyrics, choir. They sang Psalm 46. A song of Zion in which they celebrated God's presence with them in the holy city of Jerusalem, surrounded by the threat of the sea, which is often the tip of the spear of natural disasters, and surrounded by the threat of nations who warred for power and riches. Israel testified in song that God is with them through it all. Oh, even through cosmic changes, the earth will change, the mountains will shake, the waters roar and foam, the nations are in an uproar, and the kingdom totter. But God, oh, I remember the old saints in rural Mississippi would say in the middle of trouble, but God, but God. Israel saying, but God is with the people. God's presence is always a balm in the middle of chaos, uproar, and disorder. And Israel's history testified to what God had done. And so they could say, they could hear, be still, and know that I am God. And yet, the desire to be the master of one's own fate was ever there. To ensure their safety, maybe they thought, we too must take up arms. Sometimes the seas are too menacing and the nations are too strong to relax, to stop and be calm. Sometimes God's absence is felt more acutely than God's presence. Sometimes we simply want the assurance policy of self-protection through bigger weapons, more control, or by becoming our own gods. Who knows better than me what I need? There were times for Israel when the idea of trusting God seemed naive and careless. But the psalmist knows that no matter how chaotic the world gets, God has yet to act. God has a role to play in what will unfold. So Israel will trust the presence of God. Israel will behold the works of the Lord, and then they sing without hesitation. God makes war cease. God breaks the bow, shatters the spear, and burns the shields. Oh, one theologian declares that Israel places its trust in a warrior who wages peace by destroying the implements of war. And so, in response to the inevitability of war, in response to the unending prerogative of natural disasters, in response to the menacing reality and consistency of evil and unfaithfulness, ultimately, security, protection, and refuge is found in God, who is with us no matter what. Now, I want to make clear that I am not likening ourselves to the ancient people of Israel, who in their unique and particular circumstances sang this song to conquer real fears of real dangers from nature and the nations, and to bear witness to the God who helped them and delivered them time and again. I am, however, inviting us to a new discipline, a discipline of trust in God that combats our own human tendency toward self-assertion, self-absorption, self-protection, the very qualities in us that often exacerbate war, division, segregation, and chaos. I'm talking about beholding the presence of God in the midst, such that when all around us the world is devolving, we can be still and know that God is present. And when it is all said and done, war, disorder, chaos, evil, violence, none of it can prevail against us. This is ever more relevant now. In the last few years, our nation appears to be experiencing what people are called a cold civil war, in which we simply cannot agree on the basic facts about anything, about science, about politics, about economics. Violent attacks against others because of racial, sexual, religious, or political difference are on the rise, and in some ways we seem to be adjusting to it, that it just happens and we move on. And some suppose that the answer to these challenges lies in arming ourselves with ever more guns, or segregating ourselves into like-minded ethnic and political enclaves. In this environment, who will stand up and say, "But God"? Who will say into this crucible that we will hope, we will love, we will serve, because God is with us? Father Stanley is one of those in a long line of the faithful, most vividly demonstrated by the people Israel, but in other people that we know throughout history who understood that in the midst of oppression and domination and exploitation, God is with those on the receiving end of injustice. Israel, Father Stanley, Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, Archbishop Oscar Romero, Nelson Mandela, all of these faithful who stood strong in light of the menace of nature and nations, and they confronted all of it with their trust in God. They confronted with their trust in God nations and kingdoms that warred against weaker nations and weaker people. They confronted with their trust in God those who killed the vulnerable. They confronted with their trust in God those who menaced God's people over and over. Their lives and their work testify that God is refuge. They never let fear win. They never let division take hold in their hearts. And so, even if we sing this song of trust in God who wages peace, if We learn the lyrics and the tune of the song, if we hone the discipline of relaxing and stopping and being calm to lower the temperature of the volatility around us, we also know that there is no guarantee that there will be no harm. Perhaps, though, what the world needs from us is that non-anxious presence of a people who know that ultimately neither war nor weather will be the last word of our fate. And if there is anyone still questioning whether this "be still and know that I'm God" makes any difference in a brutal, violent world shaking and tottering and seeming to come apart before our very eyes, I invite you to consider that those words, "be still and know that I am God," those words are placed in quotations. Because the psalmist wants us to know that they are not the words of the singers or the writers. And it's important for you to know that they are not original proclamations from me because I stand in this pulpit. No, they are in quotations because "be still and know that I am God" is God speaking. God speaking into the chaos. God speaking into the disorder. God speaking to evil. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know that I am God is the assurance of grace and refuge from God. And so I invite you to hear it again as divine assurance as you go out into the world and confront whatever may be there. Be still and know that God is, and that God is with you. Amen.
Let us join our hearts and minds in the spirit of prayer. Gracious God, we come before you in prayer not because we know how or what to ask, but because we trust that you will meet us where we are and as we are. We struggle in these days to know how to pray, Holy One, because the needs are so deep, the hurts are too wide. We lose ourselves in the chasm and wrestle to articulate the concerns of our hearts. It seems that each exhale is instead a sigh too deep for words. There's noise that distracts, feelings to be reconciled, and a tug to discern the direction of justice. Yet uncertainty prevails. Especially in these moments, O God, may we heed your call to be still. For it is the only way to know you. As we quiet our bodies and minds in these moments, we can then hear your voice and follow where you lead. God of tenderness and compassion, amidst our uncertainties, we pause to return thanks, because we come before you not alone, but in the company of a great cloud of witnesses. Even when our spiritual community is known not in person, but rather connection. Joy shared becomes greater, sorrows are soothed, our blessings acknowledged multiply. You have given us the gift of one another, and even when we do not know how to pray or what to say, we rejoice in knowing that we are better together than alone. Give us the strength to serve each other, wisdom to heal any divide, and grace to offer words and deeds that build us up and strengthen our collective spirit. Help us, O God, become the church of your vision, the community of your hope, your covenanted people united in grace. As the silence shapes our thoughts in prayer, O God, remind us that actions speak so much louder than spoken words. Create in us a right spirit in which to love you, to love each other, to love our neighbors, and to love ourselves.
Beloved, as you go out into the world, sing, God is our refuge and help, a very present help in the time of trouble. Sing, be still, and know that I am God. And we affirm it together by saying in unison our covenant benediction. We covenant with you, O God, and one with another, and do bind ourselves in your presence to walk together in all your ways, according as you are pleased to reveal yourself to us in your blessed word of truth.